This is Speaking of Speaking. Quick tips and tools to take you from stage fright to spotlight. This podcast gives you an inside look from the world of public speaking and the speaking secrets you need to be bold from the stage, no matter what business you're in. The host of Speaking, Carl Richards.
Thank you, Matt. Yes, it's another edition of the Speaking of Speaking podcast. I am so thrilled today for our guest. I'm always thrilled when there's a guest because it means I have somebody to talk to and somebody that can share the platform with me. Susan Luke Evans is an international best-selling author. Return on Influence, The New Currency for Leaders. That's a book that you can pick up. We'll talk about that a little later on. But she has spoken on stages all around the world. And today we're inviting Susan to talk about Influential Moments is the name of her podcast, by the way, which is coming soon. So if you're listening to this sometime in the early part of 2021, then you know the podcast is coming. If it's later in 2021, then you know that the podcast has already launched. What we want to talk about is that return on influence and those influential moments and how you bring those moments to life. So, Susan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Carl. It's lovely to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure having you here. And I just wanted to say that in reading the book and having picked it up, the first thing people see when they see ROI, they think return on investment, right? Because that's how we've been trained. ROI means return on investment. You say, no, it's return on influence.
Yes, I do.
What's the difference? Why is that more important than return on investment?
Well, in my experience, it's important. I don't know that it's more important, but it's certainly equally important to return on investment, because without the appropriate kind of influence when you're communicating with your clients, your colleagues, your suppliers, your customers, whoever, you're not going to have a very profitable business. If you're miscommunicating, if you're not influencing someone in a positive, sustainable way, then your chances of realizing the potential of your company and your return on your investment are diminished. So I decided that since ROI had already been invented, why reinvent it? I would just switch it a little bit to make it a little more intriguing, perhaps, and to address something that I think is very important.
So you gave yourself carte blanche to take ROI and say, nope, I want to call it something else.
Well, a lot of us do that as we go
Sure.
through life, and whether we do it from the stage or whether we do it at the dinner table, it really doesn't matter. If it works, then we've done something well.
And it certainly has paid in dividends for you, because not only are you, this book is an international best-selling book. You're the author of it. So therefore, the proof for the credibility is there. Let's talk about a little bit more in depth what return on influence is, because I know in the book it does the deep dive and very clearly explains that influence isn't necessarily about, I'm going to give you a bunch of information, I'm going to give you a bunch of reasons why you should do this. That's not the approach you take at all when we talk about return on influence. What is the approach?
Well, the book is focused on a model which I call the influence pyramid. And everybody knows, or at least everybody that has had anything to do with communicating and all of that, the primary purposes for people to communicate in life is to either persuade somebody to do something or to think something, or to influence them at some level. And so the influence pyramid that I designed, based on research as well as my more years than I care to admit, time and experience in the business and working with a lot of different leaders in a variety of different industries over time, I built this model to address what I call the 5 levels of influence. And it's a pyramid. So if you can imagine how that pyramid looks, base level of the pyramid is what I call the compliance level. And you know that you're influencing somebody at the compliance level when they do what you tell them. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a lot of other descriptors that I could dive a little deeper with, but that's basically it. These people come to work on time. They take their breaks on time. They go to home on time and they do it all in the right amount of time. They're very punctual and they do what they're told. And so some people might say, well, that's not influence. That's just, yeah, it is influence. It's just not sustainable necessarily. And it's temporary. It lasts while they're at work. They don't think any more about it when they leave. The second level, as if you build up the pyramid, is called what I call the participation level. And at this point, you have a little bit more understanding of people and they take a little bit more initiative, but it's all based on how they feel. So if they feel good on a particular day, then they love their job, they're there, they do what they're supposed to do, everything's right with the world. If they're having a bad day, and we all have them,
yeah,
and then they're not so involved, they're not so participatory. And so they may not even come to work when they should. They may take more sick leave and that sort of thing. And so if we find that we've got more of those people in our organizations, then the way that we influence them is not helping them to grow, and it's certainly not helping our organizations to grow. The third level is called the buy-in level, or what I call the buy-in level. And these people are great. They love their job. They love the company. They get it.
Right.
But they don't want to change. And they don't want to change either because maybe they're older employees, or maybe not in age, but they've been with the company a longer period of time. They know that they know what they know. They like what they do. They don't have to really think a lot about it, that it just comes magically and everything flows, and they like the company, they like the people, or they don't have enough confidence to want to be able to change, to be able to do anything more. And so I call these folks kind of like the diamonds in the rough in an organization, because oftentimes we don't even pay any attention to them. I mean, they're good at what they do. They like it. They're good employees. Why bother?
Right.
And then you go up to the next level, which I call the identity level. At least that's what I think I call it. Sometimes I get confused on these levels, but and so I did. It's actually called the leadership level. And these are people that everybody starts to recognize in the company as leaders. They become maybe your proteges if you're the CEO or a part of the executive committee. They maybe even can finish your sentences, which is not too creepy unless it's Alexa. And but they do good things, and they're following in your footsteps, but they're not underfoot, so to speak. And they get the whole thing about the company, and they're excited about it, and they're helpful, and all of that sort of thing. And then the final level is called the visionary level. And this is the level where the people there may be part of your executive committee if you're that large an organization, or they're ready to take over your job, at least in terms of experience and skill level and all of that. These are the people that have learned to be influenced in order for them to influence other people. And they're building their legacy. They're helping to build the legacy of the organization. And so you look at all those levels and you think, well, how are you going to address them all? Because they're all very different. Well, here's my take on that. And that is that if you want to influence every level, you need to cross what I call the mission critical line on the pyramid. And that's between the buy-in level and the leadership level.
Right.
And at that point, the people above the mission critical line are people that are much more creative, much more independent, much more dependable in terms of, if you don't come in for 2 weeks or whatever, they're there. They're gonna the company is still gonna survive. And the way that you need to address those folks is by sharing part of your own personal experience, your own story. It's not about the power of storytelling. It's about elevating your message to those top 2 levels, which are sustainable levels of influence, in order for your message to be more memorable and to ensure that you're going to maximize the return on your influence.
My guest today is Susan Luke Evans, and we are talking about the return on influence, which is, ironically enough, it's the name of her international bestseller, which I don't know if she's going to, actually, I do know this. We'll share the link of how you can get a copy of that book and find out more about what we're talking about today a little later on in this podcast. But I wanted to not shift gears because you just alluded to it, but shift into what you were just talking about. And that's the story element, the element of story and how important it is. Because, and I'm sure you've seen this in organizations, I can think of companies I've worked for where the story of how the company was founded or how the founders, legacy, all of that, if it filters all the way through that mission critical line, that all of a sudden you're getting not necessarily more productivity, but different productivity based on what the individuals are supposed to bring to the table every day, because they understand this is the story. This is the story of as why this was started. And I've worked for companies that are like that, and they still to this very day share the story of the founder or of this is how the company began. And this is still our mission statement. And that's how things continue to grow and expand. And in your experience, Susan, and correct me if I'm wrong, but would you agree that companies or organizations that structure based on that model have greater success because of the story?
Oh, absolutely. And broadly speaking, at least in my experience and in my research, actually, there's basically, and this can be argued by people that talk about storytelling and all of that, but 3 different kinds of stories that fit into this model. One is personal experience, and that's easy. I can tell you a story about my kid, my grandkids, my previous life, or previous career, or something that happened this morning, or something that happened at work last week. But they happened to me, or they happened to someone that I'm close to, that they influenced me indirectly. That's a personal experience. The second type are called parables. These are the lessons learned. And so people use those all the time, sort of unconsciously or subconsciously, because we're always telling about, when I first started learning this skill or this job, here's what I did wrong. I don't want you to make my mistakes. You'll make your own. So don't waste time making mine, that kind of thing. Right. And so there's either a lesson learned or a moral to the story, that kind of thing. And then the third type is what you were just addressing, and that is those stories that are considered legendary within the organization. And in the book, there's a story that I share in different segments. It goes all the way through the book, which is just to, make you read the whole book, actually, if you really want to know the truth. But
really, it is. Read the whole book so you know what happened. So then you know the whole story.
Exactly. But it's about a client of mine. It was a chemical company, and what happened during some of the sessions and workshops that I was doing for the company in terms of management development, which is a little bit different than leadership. And so I had like supervisors and those kinds of folks, as well as some of the senior management. And so this one young man told a story, and the example in the book goes all the way through him telling the story, as well as what happened afterwards and how it became a legend. It became an internal marketing campaign. It addressed a number of different things that senior management was trying to address, and a bunch of things that they had no idea was going to happen, but it became part of their culture. And so after that, the story was mentioned to new employees. It was pictures were found in posters on the wall, and logos on a baseball cap, and all those kinds of things that they had no idea was going to happen. And so it became a legendary story. Now, there's other examples in the book that aren't necessarily legendary stories, but it's how certain leaders in certain organizations crossed that mission critical line and shared something of themselves in order to achieve a specific goal. One example could be a gentleman who was a CEO of a publishing company, and they were gonna have to downsize in a nutshell. And so he needed to call all the employees together and tell them, we've been so successful, which they had, but we're going to have to change the way we do business, and therefore we have to downsize, and some of you are going to be gone. Well, he could have said that, and that could have been the end of the meeting. Pick up your severance check as you walk out the door kind of message.
Yeah.
But instead, he chose to tell the story of his own journey within that company, and how many sacrifices he and his family had to make, how many moves they had to make, how many times they didn't want to move and they had to, and all those kinds of things, to let them know that he understood how they felt, and that everybody goes through those kinds of feelings, and maybe less than pleasant kinds of things that they go through in terms of business. That they would prefer not to go through. But it's part of growth. It's part of how you advance within an organization and all those kinds of things. And so some of them, of course, they weren't happy that they were losing their jobs, but at the end of the day, they at least didn't feel like they were alone in the process. And that even the CEO had been there and done that. And he told it in a way that allowed them to identify with it, which is the mark of a good story.
And I think it's very powerful when you shift and you do it like that. Yeah. Organizations that pay lip service, so to speak, to say, well, times are tough, and we hate to do this, and it's unfortunate. You're all great. You're all great team players, and we thank you so much for all of your contributions. Unfortunately, we have to make some changes. Like it, and people are people. They know there's another I was going to say another side of the story, but there's another dialogue that's going on behind the scenes that they'll never know about.
Yeah. And that's the part that when this becomes part of your company's culture, when it becomes part of your daily operations, that you understand why you're doing it. Yes, the charts and the graphs and the statistics and all those things are important. But what people resonate with and what causes this to be positive, sustainable influence is that these are the stories behind the bullet points. These are the stories behind the figures and the facts that you find on a spreadsheet or in a graph or whatever it is. And that's what people listen to. It's not that the other part isn't important or shouldn't be done. It has to be done if you're going to stay in business. But it allows you as the leader, and this is a leader at any level, the leader of your team, the leader of your family, the leader of your sports team that you're participate in, or the leader of your organization. Mm-hmm. This is what allows you to become human. It allows you to become approachable. It allows you to influence people because you've elevated your message to a greater height, so to speak, and to greater influence. It's not rocket science, but it's a different way of looking at things.
It's definitely a different shift in thought, and it's a different shift in operation as well. If you are a company, and obviously this podcast is called Speaking of Speaking, and you have tons of experience in speaking, and we could do a deep dive into that. But I like this because the storytelling, and we could just sit here and talk about storytelling and how boring would that be? Just to talk about storytelling, and even just say, okay, Susan, tell me a story. But no, I think the influence it creates, how it can shift attitudes, how it can actually change the bottom line in a company. And I'll share an example, and you'll understand this example. A company like Tim Hortons, we know, especially here in Canada, we know they're known for selling what? They're known for selling coffee. Now, like most restaurants, they sell practically everything else too, but they're known for selling coffee. They don't need to say in their advertising, come and buy Tim Hortons coffee. It's the best. Order your double. Like, they don't have to do that. And I remember it's probably about, I was going to say mid 2000s or mid 2010, somewhere around there. Their advertising campaigns, and you'll probably remember this, shifted from being about selling to sharing stories of places, times, moments where that cup of coffee was shared. And the one that comes to mind was maybe even the first one where they shifted their campaigning was at the hockey rink, at the arena. The father's there and the grandfather's there, and there's that whole dialogue, and you see that story, that human element, which I'm not saying people ran out and all of a sudden bought more Tim Hortons coffee, but people sat and watched those stories because of how powerful they were.
Yeah. And you can see that in a lot of commercials today. Certainly, if you watch the Super Bowl commercials, Budweiser does an amazing job with that.
Absolutely.
And they do it in 30 seconds or 60 seconds. And sometimes without any dialogue, which makes it even more impactful, even more influential. And my friend and colleague, Sam Horn, who is known around the world for her way with words, Sam and I knew each other when we both lived in Hawaii. And so we've known each other for a long, long time. And she just wrote an article actually about telling a story in 60 seconds. And if can you do that? Well, yes, you can. And then she gave these kinds of examples, exactly the same thing you're talking about. And in my experience, I was working with a client, and we had this thing about, sharing your personal experience, using your part of your story and all of that to help other people within the organization do whatever. So this one member of the senior management team had been sent to some supplier to hear about a new product or whatever. And when he came back, I had just completed a meeting with the CEO or the manager and general manager. And so I was in the back of the room, and the room was L-shaped. So I wasn't readily seen if you just rushed into the room and went to the guy's desk. And so that's what he did. And he came in and he was all excited, and he said, I just got all this information, that presentation that you sent me to, and we've got to get it out to the rest of it. We've got to do it. We've got to do it. It's great information. And then he paused and he said, but we got to figure out a way to make it more interesting. And the guy looked at him and he, kind of raised his eyebrows, and he couldn't figure it out, because here, this gentleman was really excited about it. And it was great information. And then he just flipped the coin and said, but we got to make it more interesting. And so the general manager sort of raised his eyebrows and nodded. And this guy turned around and saw me. And of course, we just had some of these workshops, and he literally hit himself along the side of the head. And he says, oh, of course, we need a story. And so sure enough, that's what they did. And they got the information out, which again proves my point that when he heard the information, it was all statistics, it was all charts and graphs and specific technical information that was good information.
Sure.
But nobody cared, enough to, and so then the guy asked him, he said, well, if you were so excited, why wouldn't that same presentation excite everybody else. And he said, the only reason I paid that close attention to it was because I knew I had to come back and make a report to you. So he probably would have lost interest, as people do when they're inundated with a lot of technical and specific statistical kinds of information, but you do have to understand that it's not easy for everybody to share part of who they are. And you become a little vulnerable and you think, no, I'm the CEO. I can't, do this or that.
I can't share because then
they'll think I'm human or whatever. And everybody's not like that. And these are not absolutes. We're all a little bit of everything. And oh, by the way, on that influence pyramid, you can be in more than one level at a time.
Wow. Okay.
Because let's say that you're at the leadership level, you've crossed that mission critical line, and people are recognizing you as the leader of their team or the leader of their department or whatever it is. And then something new comes into your sphere of responsibility, and you go right back down to compliance because you got to learn that new thing. And you're still at the leadership level. So it's even more important in my brain anyway, for people to always try to communicate and influence at those top two levels, because it spans them all. And what it does is it encourages the folks at the three lower temporary levels of influence to move up. Now, they may never cross the mission critical line, but if they gain a little bit more understanding, if they're a little bit more productive, if they're a little bit happier, it's a win-win in my book.
My guest today has been Susan Luke Evans, and a phenomenal discussion. I could talk to Susan all day long. We might have to bring you back again, Susan, if for no other reason, to bring you in to tell a couple of stories or something, because I know that's part of your passion, is sharing those stories. But what I want to do is give you the opportunity to pass something on to the audience. What would you like to share with them today?
Well, if you're interested in the book, number one, you can go to susanlukeevans.com/book. And there is an Amazon logo on that page. And then there's a little thing that you can click on underneath the logo that will take you to Amazon, where you can order the book. If you would just want to talk to me, or you want more information, all of my contact information is on my website, susanlukeevans.com. And you can get my phone number or my email there and give me a buzz, drop me an email. And if you want to learn more, or you just want to say thanks for sharing or whatever, or you can yell at me. I don't care. It's pandemic time, folks, and I live alone. So if you want to call and yell at me, that's okay.
He's got a good ear. You can tell her a story too.
And you can always tell me a story.
She'll listen to the story too.
Carl, did I give you that link for a free chapter of the book?
Oh,
I have it somewhere.
Yes.
Okay, can you share that with the folks? It's a little bit different than to order the book.
Yes, absolutely. So we'll make sure that, firstly, the links for Susan's the full book, we'll make sure that's in the show notes, as well as the link to the chapter, and also Susan's information as well, to connect with her, to share stories or shout at her. You probably won't. Once you have a conversation with her, there will be no shouting. There will not be. Susan Luke Evans, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. This has been fun. Let's do it again. And
yes, let's do it again.
Let's
Maybe
share
not
some
tomorrow,
stories.
though.
Maybe around the pool next time, or around the patio.
Someplace warm. That would be good.
Susan,
thank you so much, Carl. It's been my pleasure and my privilege. I always enjoy talking to you. So thanks.
Thank you. And remember, get out there and own the platform.
Thanks for listening to the Speaking of Speaking podcast. Fired up about something you heard today? Want to learn more? Be sure to visit carlspeaks.ca And don't forget to follow Carl on Twitter @CarlRichards72 or join the Facebook group Speaking of Speaking.